go.
You're on.
Have I got the wording on the trash bill?
I mean, we have the wording on the trash bill, but we're putting it on the governor's bill.
Yeah, we don't need it.
Hey,
Yeah.
we're putting it on the governor's bill on the
I'm giving
floor.
it to the clerk's office after
So
this.
agree as amended on the governor's bill.
Okay, so I don't have to do nothing.
No, we're not doing anything with it.
Where you? I'm gonna sit over here. Lots of love.
All right. Let's. We're started. Shut the door. Y'all bow with me, please. Gracious Heavenly Father, here we are again. To say thank you for another day in your world. To say thank you for the blessings that you continually give each and every one of us. Thanks for the blessing of life and all that it brings. Lead, guide, and direct us. Give us patience, Lord. Give us all patience, particularly me. Lead, guide, and direct us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Before we get started, I need to have a recognition. Boys, stand up. That is Will, Patrick, and their best friend and one of my other boys, Eli Tibbs. Thank y'all for being here. They will be on the floor if anybody's mean to them. Their stuff's certainly not going to go anywhere. And in the back, I'm going to recognize them later on this morning, but that's my son, BJ, and his wife, Cindy. BJ's a whole lot like his daddy. He's mean. He's like his mama. He's mean as a strapped-headed rattlesnake.
We got some house members who come up front.
Mr. McCall, Ms. Carter. Mr. McCall, you're on.
Thank you, sir. H.R. 1473 is right below the third hole in the page down.
On page one, y'all.
On page one, it's a study committee for industrial hemp. And while I'm asking, I'd like to ask you to think about Senate Bill 257, which is right above the last hole down. And then Senate Bill 450.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you.
Appreciate you putting that water bill on today, too.
Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'd like to consideration of H.R. 1397 on first page, right in the middle. It's encouraging the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act to provide some new electronic logging device regulations for the agriculture and livestock industry, recognizing that a one-size-fits-all does not work very well for our ag committee, for our ag industry. So like your ag consideration of that, please, sir.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Dollar.
Thank you. HR 1398, front page, also near the third hole. This is a study committee looking at the short-term rental industry. Think like your Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Hanson.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you H.R. 1429 on the second page, third one under modified structured rule. I'm asking for a study committee to study the effectiveness and efficiency of county governance structures, areas for improvement, and successful transition strategies.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring you H.R. 1257, second hold down on the first page. And this would create a study committee on the workforce development in home and community-based settings. So we've got a crisis really in this country with a rapidly aging population. 10,000 people in this country turn 65 each day. And increasingly we have smaller family sizes. And so we are having a real crisis with how we're going to deal with finding caregivers to care for all of our people that are aging and disabled. And this study committee would work on solutions to create good policy going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Bodie.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Rule Committee. I stand before you again today on the modified open rule, the first H.R. 446, the Johnny Tolbert III House Study Committee on Heat Stroke and Cardiac Arrest Injuries in Youth Sports. I will ask that the committee favorably ask for this bill.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Carter.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning. If you would direct your attention to page 1, H.R. 1416 is just above the third hole on the front page. It's the House Study Committee on Bail Reform, and I would ask that you would favorably call this bill today. Thank you.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you three bills. The first is on page 3, SB 427, fifth from the bottom. This is the bill that would bring our child support guidelines per state law in conformity with federal requirements so that as of July of this coming year, or of this year, we would not be subject to losing federal grant funds. The second is a resolution, SR, on the last page, the very top of page 4. SR 146. This is a resolution. Many of you may have seen folks around the Capitol with the Marcy's Law Group. This resolution, if passed, would elevate the rights that victims to crimes have, elevate those to our Constitution. I want to thank Chairman Golick and all the people all the members of the Judiciary Committee who worked so hard to work on and significantly improve the bill that we sent forward. There's one more bill, Mr. Chairman, that is not on there. It's SB 127, which is the companion to SR 146. It is the enabling legislation for that Senate proposed constitutional amendment.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Kennedy, I would have asked you this when I was talking to you a minute ago had I known this was on there. I apologize. I know that there was some concern by our district attorneys over some of the language and the wording in the measures you mentioned about the constitutional amendment. Were we able to clarify that with them, get them on board with it?
Representative Fleming, we were, and I'm very pleased to say that PAC supports this, the district attorneys support this, Marcy's Law folks support this. I think all the stakeholders do. I appreciate the question, and I'm happy to say they are on board in large part because of the good work that your Judiciary Committee did.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am supportive of Senate Bill 427. I do have an amendment that is being passed out right now. It's AM 29-2800 that makes a small change, and that's with the agreement of the agency. And I believe Senator Kennedy also will agree to the amendment. and at the appropriate time, I'd like to discuss the amendment.
Do it now.
Thank you. It's AM 292800, and it changes
Wait Mr. Coon, wait just a second.
Okay.
Everybody got one? Mr. Beverly, have you got one? Okay. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The current bill at line 41 reads, if a parent is incarcerated, income shall not be imputed based upon pre-incarceration wages or other employment-related income. That language does not track exactly with the federal regulation that we're trying to get in compliance with. And the language in the substitute does track with the federal recommendation, and it says if a parent is incarcerated, the court shall not assume an ability for earning capacity based on pre-incarceration wages. So that leaves some flexibility for the courts to exercise discretion, and it does in fact track with specific language provided by the federal regulator.
Any questions? All right. Ms. Tankersley.
Representative Coomer, is there perhaps an error on line 5 with an additional word, related income, but income may be imputed based upon on? Maybe you want the upon?
Yes, you're correct. That word on after upon is a typo.
Okay, thank you.
And I would think the rules chairman can strike that word on.
All right, first thing we're gonna do is just a scrivener's error on that. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the next, I need to hear a motion on AM 292800.
Move.
All right, this is an amendment approved by the Rules Committee. Do I hear a motion? We've got the motion. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee.
Ms. Tankersley, are you finished? Mr. Gooch.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Senate Bill 445.
Well, good morning, Mr. Gooch. The rest of them are deaf.
Sir?
I said good morning. I'm the only one that heard it, apparently. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. SB 445 on page 2. This is the annual housekeeping bill for the Department of Transportation. Just cleanup language dealing with federal compliance issues with bidding and also surplus of surplus property, the sale of that, dealing with real estate agents and auctions and the period of time that you can put this property listed with a real estate agent. It also prohibits camping under roads and bridges. Imagine that. But we're going to prohibit camping under roads and bridges. We all know what happened last year in the big fire about this time last year. So that's pretty much the summation of the bill. I'd be happy to take any questions.
No questions.
My second bill, if you will allow me, is SB 426 on page 3, also known as small cell technology. This is a bill I discussed with you last week, dealing with the wireless communications and emerging technologies that are coming out in the industry. Chairman Willard asked for a photograph of a picture of that, so I have that today. If I can hold this up, maybe you can see it. You'll recognize the picture, obviously. This is the state capitol. If you look on, if you can see the street light there right in front of the state capitol, you'll see a small dome. It's a plastic dome. It's about 16 inches in height and about 8 to 10 inches in diameter. That is what's considered the new small cell technology. Those are the antennas that you'll see begin popping up around Georgia as this technology continues to emerge. This bill allows for the use of the public right-of-way. Cities and counties currently all have different ordinances. They have a model ordinance that GMA rolled out some year and a half ago a lot of the bill in 426 is similar to what they recommended. And so this bill basically sets up a framework. It does protect historic districts. It does allow for the use of utility poles. Co-locations is required, and new poles would be allowed only after a study is done by their RF engineer and presented to the city or the county, who would then consider whether it was appropriate to permit a new pole or not.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I appreciate you bringing that picture this morning. Does your bill say that anything put on the pole can be no bigger than the picture you showed?
Actually, it does.
Where is that in the bill?
There's a description of the height of the dimensions of that antenna. I believe it's 6 cubic feet is the number in the bill. But I would stand corrected if you find it to be different. We've lowered all the numbers on all the other sizes of the equipment as well, from 28 to 25, and that was done by your Chairman Parsons in his committee.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Setzler? No. Mr. Williams?
Thank you, Senator. Isn't it true that this bill passed unanimously out of the House Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee?
You are correct.
And is it further true that 2 by 2 by 2 is a relatively small space?
Especially if you're trying to squeeze into it.
Thank you for your hard work on this measure.
Mr. Hawkins?
To be clear then, the 25 cubic foot lockers will not be used in historic areas, districts?
Every one of these antennas, these small antennas that you see on this picture, and this is a typical picture. This is not something that we found just randomly. It's really an extreme example. This is a typical photograph of what you'll see on all this technology. Every one of those antennas have to be fed to a radio receiver, which is located either next to the pole, on the pole, or underground. I can walk you down to the corner down here where the barricade is today at Mitchell Street, and there are underground boxes that have been put below the surface of the ground. So that is a possibility as well. When they require them to be concealed, the cities can conceal those in historic districts, and it would be up to the companies to comply with those concealment requirements.
But it's in the bill that they cannot put those lockers above ground in historic districts.
They have to put them somewhere.
I understand.
And so they have to work with the city under their ordinance and under their permitting agencies. Every city and county have their own permitting offices. Nobody can put a building anywhere in the city without a building permit today.
Right.
And the same go with this. They could not put any of this equipment in the right-of-ways without first obtaining a permit from the local municipal jurisdiction.
That solves the problem then.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
No more questions.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Ligon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. I have 3 bills. Senate Bill 101, which will allow members of the Department of Natural Resources who are full-time hourly employees to participate in the employee retirement system. I believe the chairman may have had an amendment for that. Then Senate Bill 338, which deals with the process by which the legislature can exercise some oversight over rulemaking authority by the departments. And then Senate Bill 339, which establishes some free speech policies for our universities.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait. On your desk, you've got LC 430980S. It's got Mr. Smith's name on it, but in the short goodies, so he don't have to do it. What that does is it takes Mr. Ligon's 101 back to its original form, and it'll be a rule substitute. Do I hear a motion? All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's approved. Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm back to talk about Senate Bill 325, the very last bill on page 2, which is a substitute, and it incorporates now 2 bills. One is step therapy for the benefit of the patients in Georgia, and the other one is extending a pilot on bariatric surgery, and that's Representative Dempsey's bill.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Page 3, I've got 2 bills, both under modified structure rule. First one is Senate Bill 363, 5 down from the top, deals with elections and closing of the polls. Any questions?
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, as you and I had a chance to discuss before the meeting, there is one portion of your bill that deals with DeKalb County and to some extent nullifying a vote they had on the pay of commissioners that has gained a lot of attention. Is my understanding correct that the proponent of that amendment was Senator Miller, and he has since decided that he's going to ask that to be taken off? Is that correct?
You're correct, but that's on Senate Bill 430.
You ain't got to that one yet?
No, sir.
Okay.
But I can get there right now if you'd like.
You want me to keep talking about the wrong bill, Mr. Chairman, or just be quiet?
And just to be clear, he's not putting it on 363.
Mr. Brass, come by and see me sometime today.
Yes, sir.
Do 4:30.
You 430 deals with the compensation of our constitutional officers. Just updating the code to match the cost of living adjustments over the last 12 years.
No questions. No, yeah, whoa. Mr. Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, in light of Representative Fleming's, you'd be amenable to an amendment to remove Section 11 of Senate Bill 430.
I'm at the mercy of this committee. I'll do whatever y'all like.
Mr. Chairman, just for...
But that would be fine.
For the Chair's information, Legislative Council is working on an amendment that would accomplish that.
I'm going to chat with Mr. Brass this afternoon. No more questions. Thank you.
I look forward to our time together.
Oh, no, you won't. It ain't going to be good. Mr. Payne.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This morning I bring Senate Bill 437 as a substitute passed by the Juvenile Justice Committee. This bill is not rewriting law, it's really just clarifying the law and removing an ambiguous may consent on do not resuscitate orders for minors. Parents, right now the current law is a parent must give consent to a DNR order, or if a parent's not available, then it takes 2 doctors to sign off and consent to a DNR order on a minor child. And this really simply just gets rid of the language in that bill where it says a parent may consent to a DNR order by oral or written, but it's just to get rid of that word may, so we reworded it so it'd be clarification.
Any questions? No questions. The other one. You got another bill?
Yes, sir. I also would just join Chairman McCall in asking once again for the consideration of Senate Bill 450.
You know how many phone calls I'm getting on that bill?
I've not called you, Mr. Chairman.
When did this thing pass out of committee? Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your question again was when did the mating bill pass out of committee?
Yeah.
I believe that was on March the 14th, sir.
When's the first time you asked for that bill, Mr. Payne?
Last week, I believe it was.
You've caused my phone and me a lot of heartache waiting so long.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure about that, if I will. I thought yesterday was the first time that senators come in and asked for that bill.
No. Mr. Knight, would you have any comment on this bill?
Well, everyone knows that I'm not in favor of baiting from a policy perspective. I don't think it's good for our resources. But I've kept to my word regarding what my colleagues have let this bill be voted out of my committee. And isn't it true, Mr. Chairman, that I am not asking this bill to be withheld from the floor? I'm actually asking that it be given a vote on the floor for the members to decide for themselves what they want to do on this bill.
Were you able to get what you wanted in that bill?
Yes, sir. We addressed several issues that I think are important going forward, and clear some confusion up between property owners, and also I think we've had a conversation about some of the other issues surrounding baiting.
No more questions, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have 3 items I ask for your favorable consideration. The first is on page 1 at the bottom, Senate Bill 349. It's a notary republic bill. It allows them to use the Veterans Identification Card as satisfactory evidence for their performing their duties. The second bill is the 5th on page 3 from the top, Senate Bill 354. This is actually a substitute from the Higher Ed Committee. It made this bill even better. It classifies certain active duty members as in-state for tuition purposes for the Technical College System of Georgia. And the last bill is the last bill on page 4. It's a Senate resolution. It allows a little creek in Chatham County currently known as Runaway Negro Creek to be renamed as Freedom Creek. I ask for your favorable consideration. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Mr. Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am back to ask for Senate Bill 257. That's the third one from the bottom of the first page. This just would require that prior to filing criminal charges for conduct relative to animal husbandry, that local law enforcement would consult with a licensed and accredited Category 2 veterinarian.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, did you hear the story in the news that was reported yesterday about some construction workers finding 3 decapitated goats in a construction site in Fulton County?
I did not hear that story.
Heard it on WSB yesterday morning on the way in. And my question is, in that scenario, if the construction, and to further report, the report said they appeared to be killed in some part of, in some ritualistic manner. That's all I heard on the report. But if your bill passes and becomes law, if a law enforcement officer walked in and observed this decapitation going on of these goats, he would not be able to even issue a citation to those people until he went and got a veterinarian's opinion saying that that was cruelty to animals. Is that correct?
I think that it says consult, so a phone call to a licensed and accredited Category 2 vet would be what this bill would require.
So he's got to get a medical professional on the phone before he can issue a citation for cruelty to animals.
Yes, sir. I would argue, I would just point out that decapitation is not always cruelty. But
thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. A. Powell.
Gentlemen.
Okay.
Senate Bill 257. I want to give you a scenario and see if this bill would correct some of that. Up in the North Georgia mountains, once upon a time, cockfighting was a great sport up that way, and it's pretty well dissipated over the years. And it's been replaced by people who are now raising and showing these same birds for show purpose, not fighting purpose. And there's been some cases over the last several years that law enforcement has taken these birds away from these people that are growing for show under the clause and charged with fighting these chickens. Now, they're destroying the chickens. They're basically killing these chickens before the person has their day in court. Will this take care of that problem or have an effect on this problem?
It should help with that issue.
In what manner would it help?
Well, I think the veterinarian would clearly indicate that simply showing a bird or an animal is not cruelty to that animal.
But you think this would probably help remedy that problem where they're destroying animals before a person has their day in court?
It has certainly been brought to my attention that in some cases animals are being destroyed prior to any judicial process.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the vet is some kind of a 2 vet. What is that?
Category 2 veterinarians are veterinarians that have been trained in treating large animals, food animals. This only applies to food animals. So it's a difference. It's just like different doctors. They have different areas that of expertise, and this would require that you consult with a veterinarian that is skilled in the art.
But to Representative Whip Coomer's response, the police officer would have to not only just get a regular vet, but would have to find one that had a Category 2 license?
Well, I'm unfamiliar with the situation that he's speaking of, but I have certainly witnessed animals dead on the side of the road before that I don't think this would require a vet for. I mean, if you caught someone in the act of mistreating animals, then yes, but if you find 3 goats without, or 4 goats without heads, I'm not sure how that applies.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, isn't it true that what this bill is aiming to do is to prevent local uninformed or folks who are not aware of animal husbandry in this case from going out and actually making charges, issuing charges without the knowledge that they need to see if indeed animals are being treated in accordance and in a way that wouldn't constitute that. And furthermore, let me give the example if it would. There was a case here, I believe, a year or 2 ago in Fulton County, South Fulton County, where a farmer had cattle that was out there, and somebody came by, reported them, and thought that the animals were underfed or being treated in a way that was not right, and that charges were brought against that farmer, ended up bankrupt, all because of somebody without knowledge of the cattle, without knowledge of the breed, had come by and they'd been falsely accused. And this gentleman ended up going into bankruptcy trying to defend himself with charges. And further or not, more so, isn't it true that this bill simply says that we're going to, before that can happen again, you've got to go get a veterinarian who has expertise in animal husbandry, in other words, large animals, our livestock, to come and see that before somebody at a local level can come in and charge somebody with animal cruelty and subject them to criminal charges and possibly bankruptcy like it did in the case that I just mentioned.
Yes, sir. This has been requested by local law enforcement because they are asked to file these criminal charges in areas that they do not have expertise in.
Okay. I'm going to do one more, Mr. Setzler.
To the author, thank you for this bill. Isn't it true that there are people that had a steak biscuit or ham biscuit this morning, who, if they witnessed the actions of a slaughterhouse happening next door to them, might be tempted to make a claim of animal cruelty, but in fact, this is consistent with standard animal husbandry practices.
Yes, sir. I had a ham biscuit this morning.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee.
Mr. Stone.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On page 2, about halfway down the page, is Senate Bill 461. It deals with barbers and cosmetology professionals. This is brought to us by the chairman of the board, and the board itself modernizes practices and terminology. Be happy to answer any questions. Oh, I would add, there is an important amendment added in the House committee that will help with cancer patients who have need for cosmetology services.
No questions. Thank you.
All right. 3 lines down from 461 is Senate Resolution 774. This would create a joint study committee between the House and Senate to look into establishing guidelines for adoption living expenses. It would also help us establish procedures, both agency and private attorney adoptions. Be happy to answer any questions.
No questions. Thank you.
At the bottom of page 3 is Senate Bill 452. This would strengthen cooperation between local law enforcement authorities and federal ICE authorities and help enforce the local government's compliance with ICE detainers. In other words, if a person who is arrested in our criminal justice system is on a federal detainer, that ICE would be notified that the person is in state custody. Would not extend the time that they stay in state custody. It would the notice to the ICE authorities would take place within 72 hours prior to release.
Mr. Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, on Section 2 of the bill, there's a provision in there that seems to pertain beyond the immigration context with respect to bail, and says that an accused cannot be released on his own recognizance according to a schedule and would have to appear in front of a judge. Can you speak to that?
Yes, that was added by amendment in the House committee, and apparently it would require individual determinations for OR releases.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might follow up, but wouldn't that have the effect, if there's presently a schedule that provided for a release of an accused on a known recognizance bond, that this bill would have the effect of preempting that?
The House amendment would have that effect. That's correct.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer, you've been working too hard.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, it's my privilege to request your favorable consideration of 3 bills. On page 1, 2/3 of the way down, Senate Bill 89 creates the Georgia Freight Rail Program within the Department of Transportation to help improve our railway system, relieve truck traffic from our roads and highways, and extend the benefits of the port to expansion to all parts of Georgia.
No
Approved
questions.
unanimously by your Transportation Committee.
Next one.
On the next page 2, 5 bills down, Senate Bill 376, dealing with identity theft. It eliminates the fee for freezing and thawing or unfreezing your credit file with the credit bureau. Approved
question.
unanimously by your banking committee.
No questions. Next one.
2 bills down, Senate Bill 396, making some changes to the law that sets up the telephone system for the physically impaired to anticipate new technologies.
No questions.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. Mr. Thompson.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On page 3, I bring to you SB 403, and this is our election bill, replacing the voting machines.
Any questions, Mr. Thompson? Well, Mr. Hold on. Mr. Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The gentleman yield.
I will.
According to SB 403, isn't it true that any machine, according to this bill, any machine that we use would be subject to hacking?
I fully understand your question. Any machine that has electronics within it, I guess technically could, but the bill itself doesn't address that.
Right, and that in the current situation, does the gentleman further yield?
I do.
Yeah. The point that I'm getting at is that are there not better systems that are currently available that reduce the ability for hacking in a vulnerable situation that we need to be more cognizant of the way in which we appropriate people's votes in the way that we would actually do a recount if we needed to. My larger point, sir, is that this bill does not go far enough to address the vulnerability of our systems, and are there not better machines that are available to address that?
Representative, with all due respect, this bill does not in any way dictate what can be utilized. What it does is sets up the opportunity first for us to be able to change out the DRE machines, which currently their operating system is no longer supported. So we know we are very vulnerable as it sits. This just creates a framework for us to be able to have the Secretary of State and Election Board to be able to put in place a system and or devices and process to be able to protect everyone's vote in the state of Georgia.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The author addressing Mr. Beverly's question, isn't it true that our current DRE systems have been struck down in other states by their courts because there is no verifiable backup, and that if there's a computer glitch where 3,000 votes may be lost, the existing system wouldn't have the robustness of what you propose in this bill. Isn't that true?
That's true.
Isn't it true that if we believe we need to have a paper system, this bill creates a mechanism to make that happen, and a vote of no on this is a vote to maintain our status quo? Isn't that true?
That is correct.
Mr. Martin.
I'm going to yield.
I will.
Mr. Senator.
Yes, sir.
Just to be clear on this, is this system, whichever vendor might prevail in it, will produce for the voter a paper ballot with the readable, human readable names of the individuals and the answers that they voted for, correct? So it would be a name, or it would be a yes, no, it would be a human legible form, it would go and be kept under this bill for the recount.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this sets up again the framework to do exactly that, of which we don't have today. That's correct.
But you're not, is it not true that you're not picking a vendor, you're not picking a winner, you're just saying that you have to do these things, and when a voter walks away, they'll be able to look at a piece of paper, that piece of paper will be counted, that will be locked away for a recount and kept secure so that the voter can go back and they would know that their ballot was kept.
That's right. Mr. Chairman, we were very careful to make sure that we included all the necessary verbiage to be able to do exactly what you're saying.
No more questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I also might ask for Senate Bill 315, it's not on a blue sheet. Senate Bill 315 provides penalties for unauthorized access, knowingly unauthorized access to someone's computer or network. And Mr. Whip has been gracious enough to, if we're able to get this floor, to carry it for me.
who's gonna carry it?
Our whip.
He's on a run of bad luck. I don't know how to do that.
We can certainly change that if necessary.
No, wait a second. We do have a question here.
Are you comfortable that, you talk about illegal access, are you comfortable that this bill draws the defining line between actually doing research and illegal access?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we open this up and we've heard from every sector, I think, in the state, out of the state, and so on, to make sure this appropriately covers what we're looking to do.
And based on some conversations I've had with the Attorney General's office, a couple of others, 47 other states have this, right?
That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more questions. Get out while you can.
Thank you.
Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3 of the blue sheets, fourth down from the top, is Senate Bill 348. It's passed out of your Public Safety Committee with a couple of changes, but basically the underlying bill deals with the Technical College System of Georgia and giving them the same authority to exercise their police powers on every campus throughout the state. Right now they're restricted to just the campus in which they're employed by, and it also allows the technical college system to enter into mutual aid agreements with local law enforcement on the local level, similar to what University System of Georgia does. There were some changes made in your Public Safety Committee, I think, to address some of the concerns that might have been raised over the last couple of weeks, and I look forward to continuing that conversation, Mr. Chairman.
No questions.
Thank you, sir. If I might, Mr. Chairman, I do have one other bill that I'd like to briefly mention real quick. It's not on the sheet. Senate Bill 446 is passed out of committee yesterday, and it deals with abandoned motor vehicles. It just clarifies where information can come from for the towing companies, and it ups the derelict value. Those are the two things that it does, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your...
No questions.
Thank you, sir.
Y'all, I want you to turn your attention over here to this wall. That is John David Burns. I think he's kin to somebody in here. I'm not sure. Mr. Harbin.
Good morning, Chairman Meadows and distinguished members. This resolution is on page 2, about midway down, 2 lines above modified structure rule. Has to do with a resolution to the U.S. Congress to take action on a constitutional amendment declaring that parents and not the government are the ones in charge of their children and the decisions in their children's lives. The amendment will allow parents the right to direct the upbringing of their children, protected from both federal and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Dealing with parents, which we've always allowed parents in the decisions of education and the upbringing of the children, this resolution simply is to go to our U.S. Congress and ask them to protect the rights of parents with their children.
No questions? Anything else? He's good.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Let's start with Mr. Spencer. Before Mr. Spencer gets started, on your desk you've got a substitute to 335. 335 became an open vehicle this morning, and all that means that it was stripped out again, and we stripped it just a little while ago. They put one of our members' bill back in there. Her bill is on another bill, so it's open. And this, again, it's LC 29811S, and it's Mr. Spencer's sexual predator bill. I'm gonna make the motion, my name's on it. So I have a second. All those in favor of the amendment signify by aye. Those opposed, same sign. Mr. Spencer.
Thank you.
You did a good job there. You have answered those in the past, so there shouldn't be any. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 3 minutes till. You don't need to raise your hand to put your name by a bill. If you've got a bill you need to discuss, hit the button. Mr. Willard.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I call it's not on the blue sheet, but on your yellow sheet. Senate Bill 184, which came out of the Judiciary Committee, deals with the North Fulton Hospital for Sports Medicine, and it's to try and resolve an issue that's concerning the CON and failure to be able to get the courts to understand that this was approved by the Department of Health and should be permitted to go forward. I ask for its favorable consideration.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Senate Bill 154, not on the sheet. It's what we've been working on for 3 years relating to teachers having unlawful sexual contact with students. Representative Chandler led on this issue for some time, and we've got a vehicle that's been perfected with PAC and other interests we'd like to put on the floor next week, SB 154.
Anybody else? All right. What we're going to do now is we're going to do the supplemental calendar for today. And I will remind you that it will not be the only supplemental calendar between now and Thursday. I'll also remind you that Tuesday morning our meeting will start at 8:30, and we're, as the Rules Committee, you're going to hear a bill. All right. Modified open, this again, today's supplemental calendar. Modified open, HR 913. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? So, under modified open, HR 1398. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, HR 1473. All those, Richard said we need some help. Okay. We're making ropes, if you wonder. All those in favor signify by aye. It's on. Under modified structure, SB 263. Have moved in a second. All those in favor signify by aye. Opposed, same sign. Those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. It's on. Under modified structure, SB 422. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified structure on the back page, SR 537. All those in favor signify by aye. It's on. All right. Next, we're going to set the calendar for Tuesday. Under modified open, HR 1160. We're gonna find out what that stuff is. We're gonna listen to it on, I still don't know what that does. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It carries. Modified open, HR 1317. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's modified open, HR 1397. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's modified open, SB 461. All those in favor signify by aye. The rest of you not going to say anything? All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's modified structure. You heard the explanation of 127. It was on the yellow sheet. It is the enabling legislation we've got for the other one I'll do in a second. But it's SB 127. Do I hear a move? All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Modified structure, top of the page, SB 335. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Second one, SB 338. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. SB 339. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Towards the bottom, SB 427. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. And this is the resolution that goes with the one you just did. This is on the back page, SR 146. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? That's where we're going to start. Thank you.